decide where to edit it in. Yeah, good. I mean, yeah, well, I was going to ask you what your life was like before, this whole, the pandemic versus
Yeah.
now, because I was curious as to if it's changed a lot, for you in particular, because were you still practicing? Are you
No,
still practicing?
I retired like a month ago.
Wow.
My timing is never very good, but this time it worked out. Yeah,
Yeah.
I sold my practice in October, and then I worked as an associate through the end of February. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. So, um,
How about you? Are you still practicing?
oh, barely.
Yeah.
I practice maybe a day a month. And really, that is me just finishing up really big cases
Okay.
that I've been with for the last year or two, full mouth reconstructions and
Yeah.
multiple
Yeah.
surgeries. And
Mm.
I've been with these patients for a couple of years, and I don't want to abandon them right at the end of their treatment. So,
Is that the
yeah,
rhythm you keep?
no, I'm fully exiting.
Ah, wow.
But I mean, at least I think. I
Yeah.
guess you never really know what life will
I can
bring.
relate to that.
Yeah, but I'm pretty certain because I found something that I enjoy doing a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I have to say that the nice thing about dentistry when I'll go in, even if it's a day a month, is just, I guess, the kind of the flow I get in, just
Mm-hmm.
working with my hands and not having to think about anything else. Because it seems like the rest of my month I'm thinking about the brain and people's minds, and so I'm doing a lot of thinking. So it's a
I
nice
love it.
break.
Yeah.
So so have you been, I mean, everybody's affected by this pandemic, obviously, in different ways. How
Yeah.
have you been affected?
Well,
Maybe first in terms of your schedule.
I was
Yeah.
kind of already quarantined before the quarantine. I mean, I was working from home. And so I was going through a pretty significant identity shift already. And I would say and then I was building out my coaching business. So the biggest effect is life at home, where there is no, there's constant interruptions. I have a 9-year-old and wife at home, and so it's hard to work there. I'm actually in my old dental office right now, and it's quite a bit more productive for me. But the most drastic change for me is, one, worrying about my elderly parents, I suppose, and
Yeah.
two, the topic intensity of the coaching calls has been a complete shift. Because I mean, I think about it as like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We were up in like this aspirational level, and all of a sudden it's like, boom, safety, like
Right.
fear, security. And so some of those days, especially when dentists were shutting down and I was having to talk them through their layoffs and what that looked like and how to address their teams and do it with some level of grace and compassion. Like the end of the night, I was just like vibrating from anxiety. I suppose it's compassion, but it's just that I mean, I've given myself the news fast for sure. After a couple of days, I went from informed to overwhelmed to no exposure to news to speak of. So I think just like anyone else, it's the level of anxiety of what may be in 2 months, 6 months, that is the open browser window that's always kind of taking some time and attention. But having exited from dentistry just a month before, I started my practice in the recession of 2009. So I felt like I was battle tested in so many ways during that time that I feel, I'm saved from this recession to some degree, but it gives me another look or another angle to help other dentists through it. So that's kind of the silver lining that I'm taking from it right now.
What are some of the key pieces of wisdom or guidance or reflection you're giving to some of the people that you're coaching? Because I'm sure probably every listener is feeling that sense of survival mode to some extent.
Yeah. I would say the number one is to serve. I know from most of my life, from being painfully shy, from going through a fair amount of financial and emotional crisis early on in my startup, that when the language becomes all internal, that's the vicious cycle, the tailspin, so to speak, that's really hard to pull out of. But if you can find some level of generosity, whether that's reaching out to a team member, just a text saying, how are you doing? Or keeping them informed of what you know as far as the regulations and what we're hearing from dental authorities and government authorities. I feel like going to that leadership level of I have to take care of some people is the easiest way to de-stress, to make sure that you know that people are relying on you. And the other piece would be like, the hero's journey, all the great heroes, the great stories, the person wasn't on a path to be a hero. It was the circumstances that called them out and said, we need you, or what are you made of? And so I just help remind them that there are people, whether it be kids or spouses or team members or community members, that because your first name is doctor, they're looking on you for anything. And if that's fear, then that's probably the biggest contagion in most of our communities. So just making sure that they understand that they have a role and a goal and a responsibility here, I think sometimes pulls us out of that. Because I know, like, if I'm alone in my office, my inner dialogue is one thing. My 9-year-old comes and wants to watch Masked Singer with me, it's a completely different thing. And so being able to pull outside of yourself to give and serve, I think, is the quickest antidote to a lot of the fear. But the uncertainty is hard to ignore. So I'm really empathetic too. It's you don't want to be ignorant to it, because you need to play a cash flow game or whatever it is in your practice, but you also can't be all consumed where you're worthless when they green light us and say it's time to get back to work.
Yeah. I love how you drew attention to, for the hero's journey, when we're pulled into the obstacle, it's very rarely of our own volition, right? I mean, we're not asking for them.
Right.
And I actually think right now would be a great time to read any of Joseph Campbell's work, or The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. I think
for sure.
is
For
a
sure.
great, when I read The Obstacle is the Way, I had this, it was so funny. I was so motivated by that text that I would read it, and after a couple of pages, I would feel like I would have to go do something.
There's a call to action on every page.
Yeah. I mean, it was
definitely
just,
know what you mean.
Yeah. But I mean, those kinds of books, I think, are really helpful in reframing the situation at hand, as opposed to just getting caught in that tailspin of, the uncertainty and catastrophizing potential outcomes. And because the truth is, no one knows how everything's going to turn out. And so I think that if you can reframe it in terms of, this is just my journey, this is my story, this is an obstacle that I'm on, but there's an opportunity here, or, looking at it from a stoic standpoint, I think both of those are great. Yeah.
Have you seen that documentary? I think it's called Finding Joe, with the kind of a narrative on Joseph Campbell and some of the people that he's heavily influenced.
I haven't.
It's really good. I've watched it a couple times, but there's one segment, and I can't remember who the interviewee is, but he was, essentially a disciple. He knew Joseph Campbell personally, and he was asking about the path, like the personal path that we all should be on, and how you know if you're on the right path and who you should follow to make sure you're on the path. And he essentially said, if there's a path there, it's not your path, because yours is yours to discover, right? It's unique. It's a category of one. And I've had this feeling, and I think I've even spoken on podcasts and from stage, is that we were due for a reset. And you could kind of see this pendulum swinging from this kind of fictitious, inflated life, Instagram highlight reel, money chase, and then you could start to see like meditation became in vogue, and then you started talking about morning routines and personal habits, so you could see the pendulum swing back. And I was hoping and feeling like organizations, whether it be dental practice or otherwise, that we go back to like creating a culture where, you know, it's more than just a paycheck. Like, is there any meaning there? Is there any, I felt like that was coming, but I sure didn't expect it to be like whiplash. Like all of a sudden, I think both dentists and team members are alike are sitting there, one, because we have the time, but two, we've been scared straight in like, was I doing the right thing? And when I go back, will it look similar or significantly different? I just, one of my coaching clients, the office manager, essentially said like, I ain't happy. I need a demotion, like reduce my pay, reduce my responsibility. I need some peace of mind when I'm at work. And I feel like that will be it'll be difficult at first. I mean, because there's pain associated with it, but I think the long-term benefits, we might see a significant upside and people connecting with something much more important than status or bank account numbers or whatever you hear in dental circles, my production this month, whatever it may be.
Right. Yeah, that endless race towards what, right? Like, because when you get that thing that you're trying so hard to get, then it always becomes something else.
Yeah.
And it's like, when is it enough? I totally agree. I mean, I think right now there's almost a collective consciousness upgrade going on where people are being forced in a lot of ways to evaluate their lives, their time, what they truly desire in ways that maybe they'd never have before. And it's interesting because I think about my parents' generation and how they all would kind of have one job their whole career, work in one place. How even though maybe the family values was a little bit more maybe at the center, I think in a lot of ways they were also asleep because there wasn't a lot of reflection on what it was they actually wanted. It was more so just like you said, following kind of the path. And then with the, with entrepreneurship and the way that technology literally changed everything. And then you had kind of the millennial mindset and thinking outside of the box, and people like Tim Ferriss really creating this shift in the world to do your own thing. I think that we almost overcorrected into, yeah, I can do anything, but then it becomes this endless pursuit of success. And then all of a sudden you're like, what am I even trying to achieve here? Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because
it's so radical and so quick. Like I remember I was in dental school when Dental Town came online. And so that all of a sudden, I think in our profession, because I always had like an entrepreneurial lean, I was in the back of the room during histology reading dental economics, like mining it for just some gem, right? And then that started. And then all of a sudden, like everything that was in these silos that you'd pay a consultant $40K a year for was like there and available. And then it went from online to podcasts. And now you talk to younger dentists and there's this like paradox of choice that they literally are frozen in inaction because there are way too many options, right? It's like this Mexican restaurant down the street. Like I go there and I don't know what to order because it's volumes of different options, right? But if I go to this boutique sandwich shop that I love called the Craftsman, they always have like 5 things. And then it's like, boom, like it's all great, both restaurants, but my behavior is completely dictated upon the options that are available to me. Right. And now you see that on a grand scale.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I found that with the people I've been interviewing this last week and a half that, everyone's experiences are all over the board, but there's quite a few that have really, I guess in a way, been forced to take stock of what they're doing with their time and energy. But on the other side of that, they're finding so much freedom.
Yeah.
There in terms of, oh, I've been kind of missing some things because I've just been going so hard and so fast.
It's strange. Like one of the key tenets in my coaching model is clarity, because I feel like if we get that off, if we're off there, velocity becomes a detriment. Like faster in the 100%. Wrong direction, no thanks, right? And to sit with a dentist at any stage in their career. We've proved ourselves to get the DAT, undergrad. We just keep trying to prove ourselves, and we don't get off that cycle really ever. And then you pose the question like, what do you want? And it's like, I have no idea, particularly because we're serving all the time too, right? So, this patient has these needs, this patient has these needs, both clinical and psychological, and then we're meeting team needs. And so we lose ourselves on that. And all of a sudden you have some moment to think like, what do I want and why do I want it? And there's nothing there. It's been so long since we've made a grandiose life decision, I feel like, and now's the time to really say like, am I on point? Am I off point? If I always use the frame of like the whole rocking chair test or the eulogy exercise. Like, are we on a path of regret or a path of regret minimization? I think now is the perfect time to really have those internal dialogues and journal, and because it isn't one session, I know that, but we have the time where we could put in the work, and to fill it with more noise, I think, is a really poor use of the opportunity at hand here.
I love so many things you just said. The endless, this endless drive to prove yourself. And then you ask them, what do they want? And they kind of have this blank face. I know that, when I kind of came to this point a few years ago where I was like, I had done all these things that I thought would take me a career to do. And then I just sat down one day and I just was like, is this it? Like, I don't feel like I thought I was going to feel, right? And I went on this really long kind of internal journey of trying to figure out what's going on here. And I realized that if we don't have a good sense of self-worth, if we don't feel worthy, then we're going to spend our lives trying to prove that we're worthy, right? And it's so funny how so many of us are on that trajectory without even knowing we are. Like, if somebody were to ask us, do you feel worthy? We would say, of course I feel worthy. But then it's like, well, then what are you doing? Why are you doing everything that you're doing? Does this really fulfill you?
So well said.
When this first started, I was talking to a few of my clients that I coach, and I was telling them that the funny thing was everybody kind of, constricted, especially with their money and what they spend their money on. And it's interesting how one of the first things that goes is sort of the self-care, like, talking to a coach and working through those things, because they're like, well, no, because they really get down to like survival, like, well, I don't know what's going to happen. But the interesting thing is, just like you said, this time is actually the time to be doing some of the inner work and some of the reflecting.
Yeah, double down. I mean, it feels good in the short term, but the payoffs in the long term, just from what we were talking about, like the trajectory, like if you're off by 3 degrees, you continue that for 3 more decades, like you're in a different planet. So now is the time to course correct. If you feel like you've been off or on the wrong path. I know you and I have both had significant professional shifts, and I think we'll see a lot of that is like a dialogue of what was important, and how did I get off course, and how do I course correct. All those things are really important questions, because if not, we go back into an economy that has more resistance than maybe we'll have ever seen or will ever see. And my dad's 81, and I was talking to, he was born in 38, so past the Dust Bowl essentially, but no memories of that. And so this is, at 81, is kind of the most significant global event he's ever seen. And so if we don't use this time, we're just going to default to old habits. And if we default to old habits, our fulfillment standards will be reduced because there'll be more required of us as professionals, whether it be just the regs that who knows what's going to come out as far as infection control. You're going to have to work harder at building trust because everyone's scared. You're going to have team members that are going to come back as different people than who you knew 3 months ago. So, I hesitate to say all that. I mean, I'm essentially saying be selfish, and I think that's your message too. But selfish in the spirit of service always wins. So those are the most fulfilled people historically. And it now is not as it's the perfect opportunity. And if people are too immersed in whatever episode on Netflix, like it really worries me of not seizing what's in front of us as a gem, as opposed to what I think a lot of people are feeling like it has to dominate our lives. So you talked about reframe. It's that decision of, is this a blessing or a curse, that'll ultimately dictate the fate of any listeners or anyone in general, right?
Yeah, and the there's so much that you just said that I want to reflect back, but in terms of the sort of selfish thing, I've noticed, especially in dentistry, because I have coaching clients, but actually a lot of them are not dentists. But I've spoken with a lot of dentists that want to do coaching, but they are kind of caught in this, well, I feel like I should be able to figure it out on my own. And I think some of them do feel selfish if that's where they spend their money on, especially if they're, they have young families and if you are not, if we as individuals are not centered in a good place, then when we try to help others, we are not really helping anyone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so I really believe in first and foremost, everybody cleaning up their own side of the street. And so much since I've been sort of going through this journey, personal journey, I've realized so much of everything that happens around us is an inside job. I mean, we like to kind of blame everybody else, but at the end of the day, oftentimes it's us that's projecting, and it's things that we haven't fully processed and worked through. So if literally the entire world just took this time to reflect and only helped themselves, I mean, and I'm talking about, minus like the healthcare workers that are actually helping people that are dying, et cetera. But if a lot of people took the majority of their time and they actually did some self-reflection, the world would be a completely different place. And, I'm all for taking some rest and relaxation during this time. And, you mentioned Netflix, like, it's okay to chill and watch Netflix. I'm doing the same thing. But if you are just trying to get by and you are just trying to distract yourself, I think that you're going to come out of this worse off than how you went in, because your nervous system is going to be stuck in a sympathetic state, and then you're going to try and go back to work to a world that has probably changed. And in a way, you kind of missed, like you're saying, this opportunity. How, if people that are listening are like, okay, I get what you're saying, but I don't even know where to start, what would you tell them?
Well, I mean, I think you point out a very important thing that took me 4 decades to figure out, is like, we are our addictions, addictive thought patterns. I mean, the positive term is habits, right? Or rituals or systems in a business. And so I think when we're getting clear, you can almost think of them, or this is how I think of them, as like dominoes. And so it kind of becomes this priority thing. But you'll find, like you already said, that if you push over the right domino, others fall. And so, like, for some people, it may be like, what's the first thing you do in the morning, or what's the last thing you do before bed, and really examining those sorts of things. Because what's common is that we caffeinate, or we watch the news, or we something with a blue light right before bed, so therefore our sleep is affected, therefore we're not alert in the morning, therefore we're drugging we're hopped up on caffeine. And so when you see the cycles and the patterns, and you can see an interrupt there that says, okay, if I stop doing this or start doing this, then everything kind of downline changes to some degree. And so the one thing that I would warn, just because I am a dentist and I work with dentists and I see it again and again, is that dentists always want to go from like 0 to 90.
Yes.
And therefore they blow it within. So if you're non-active, the marathon is not the answer. The walk around the block is the answer. And so being compassionate with yourself and not using that achiever's mindset that got you into dental school or through dental school, and understanding what a good habit really looks like, how we stack habits to influence behavior. Um, there's a lot in that, but it's really, using clinical terms, we have to diagnose what are habits that are serving us and what aren't. That gives us a truth, a baseline, and then we start putting together a treatment plan, so to speak, just like in dentistry. But if our diagnosis is off or ignored and not done, then everything down line is a knee jerk. Therefore, it has limited gains. Then we get frustrated. So it's really, in coaching, somebody once told me that you can never leave a place that you've never been. And I just had to sit with that for a little bit. But I understand that now that we have to go into the uncomfortable truths of like, this is where I'm thriving, but more importantly, this is where I suck and where I'm frustrated and where I'm angry. This is what's holding me back. Once we have that proper diagnosis, then it's fairly easy to prioritize, but we don't want to go there because it's uncomfortable. So yeah, I think using clinical terms, it's a diagnosis and treatment planning process. And we start with the biggest win. Like in dentistry, it may be extract the necrotic tooth that could abscess on Christmas Eve. There's that in your life probably. And dentists are doers, but usually as a pro tip, it's not the addition of one thing, it's a subtraction of one thing. And that could be a relationship, that could be, a mindless habit. I felt in 3 days, I fell into a habit of wanting to become the world's expert on the COVID virus, and no one knew anything. So I was getting like all sorts of conflicting informations, which like created the psychological overload, and I just had to unplug. Right. So for me there, when I was getting off track, it was the stop doing of the thing as opposed to trying to pack more into the day, which I think we're socialized to do. So that's a long-winded answer, but I think we have to understand that we are our habits. Some of those habits are just stories with our identity. So we can look at it from a psychological standpoint or a behavior standpoint, but usually the seeds are the psychological. And so all that to say, we go back to reflection and saying like, what's important? Where am I headed? Where am I at? And what's the next best step to get me there? Is where I think people need to go if they're going to be effective here.
Yeah. I like that you said, the pro tip, it's more of a process of subtraction. That's one thing that I discovered on my own journey, and that I also talked to my clients about, was any of the information that I'm giving people is not to add to who they are. Everybody is their own unique, super special, creative, powerful beings, right? But so much of that gets quieted because of our conditioning when we're younger, and then the habits and the patterns and the self-limiting beliefs. And so the process of really transforming that into a fulfilled life is to be able to use critical thinking to find your conditioning. What was I conditioned to do? What do I actually believe? Do those beliefs align with who I really am and who I want to be? And how can I transform those to fit the story that I actually want to tell about my life? And all of that requires thinking about your life. Right.
Yeah. And it's a constant process too. All my scripting was Nebraska farm boy work ethic, dusk till dawn. I was shy. And so I'm 45 and I'm still carrying so much of that with me.
Yeah.
And fighting unseen battles. And if I don't reflect upon that, like what's really going on here? Was it something that happened in the church? Was it something that happened at home? Somebody told me to respect elders, therefore I go meek when I talk to a 65-year-old. All these sorts of things, that there's these hidden resistances that go on all day. They're true viruses of the brain, and we have no idea that are going on there because that's just who we are, right? I just had a really cool podcast interview guest named Ben Hardy, who wrote Willpower Doesn't Work, and then he's writing right now, or he's publishing Personality Isn't Permanent. And he talks about like a lot of these personality tests have no foundation whatsoever. And then we go into this Facebook had to ban the personality test because they become so popular, because you want to know what Star Wars character are you, or whatever. And so these are just labels that are keeping us from being who we want to be. And the thesis of the whole book is like, your purpose is what you decide you want it to be.
Yeah.
So that we have to be able to free ourselves from who we are, these labels, in order to have the life that we want, which goes back to the discussion of what do you want? And it's all an internal process that's done behind closed doors with the TV off, maybe a pen in hand. At least that's how I do it. But you have to be able to carve out time, and it's in a home setting that isn't always supported. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is that alone time. And my clients, I'm like, you have to have CEO time, because the context switching of patient to patient to now you have a marketing decision, now we have a financial decision, is like so overwhelming that you have to pull out that time and say, like, are we even who we say we are? Are we who we want to be? So that happens organizationally and personally, but without the thinking time, you just default to old norms and speed up, because more is better and money equals success, right?
Right.
or
Right.
so we're trained.
Yeah. You know, there's so much resistance to going through this process, right? I mean, people could be listening to this saying, yeah, okay, whatever, like maybe. I think part of the issue is not seeing what's on the other side. So well, first of all, I just want to note that, you know, if you were to, if a listener were to make a list of, okay, this is why I do everything I do and this is what I want, my suggestion to that person would be, go deeper. Because what you first start, unless you've already done a significant amount of internal work, usually what you first are writing out is probably more of your conditioning. So it's probably more of what you were taught by your parents and society and school, et cetera, that this is what you should want. And a nice contrast to that is to, you know, make another column and write about what makes you feel good. Because that's another one where people don't think about what makes them feel good.
No.
Especially dentists, like this 0 to 90. Dentists are so hardworking and so achievement focused, and we've been trained to be that way. I mean, we've literally been like, we have to get straight A's, etc. And so if you start contrasting what makes me feel good, and sometimes I'll tell clients, you know, just live your day, but then when something makes you feel good, write it down and keep a running list. And then over time, start comparing that to what are your behaviors setting you up for? Are they setting you up for feeling good, or for things that are completely separate from that list? And then also question some of your beliefs. So if your belief is, well, like, for instance, you said, you know, work from dusk till dawn. Like, there's a belief that money doesn't come unless you work yourself to the bone.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a belief. Like, that's not necessarily true, but if you believe it's true, it's going to be true for you. So, I mean, at first, the process of going internally can feel so fucking disorienting, because when you start really questioning every single thing that you're thinking, you start thinking, okay, well then, if all of these things are more my conditioning, then who am I, right? But that I think is where the reward of the process comes in, is when we start landing on these gyms that really resonate with us, and that all of a sudden we're doing activities that are like giving us energy and giving us joy and giving us a sense of vitality, and we're connecting with people in time and space differently. So if you could just talk a little bit about how you felt before you did some of this internal work on your own. And I know that there was kind of some precipitating events that forced you to go internally, and then how your life has evolved since then, and sort of like, what is the light on the other side?
Oh man. Well, I mean, I think you teed it up perfectly, because that was my identity, was that if I didn't have what I wanted, I wasn't working hard enough. And I was at the point where I couldn't have worked any harder, and I still didn't have cash flow. I didn't have a lot of these sorts of things. I didn't have sleep at night. I didn't have
Yeah.
all these things that I knew I eventually had to figure out. And I had to stop fighting Mother Nature and start leveraging Mother Nature. And that started with my own psychology. And I think, we keep referencing that, but it's important to say, like, we think we're these intelligent human beings. We think we're these skilled actors, and we're not at all. I mean, like, the logical side of us is 5-10%, but most of it's stuff below the surface. It could be like your first heartbreak in junior high or whatever that's limiting things that you are doing now, right? And so it's that full appreciation that I have no idea who I am, and I do have a pretty good memory of the history that I've had, and start connecting the dots. For me, it was an understanding that the doing and being cycle was getting me very little traction. I was spending tons of time and energy studying marketing, studying business, pushing myself, and it wasn't working. I mean, I was making more as an associate. And then there was financial crises and emotional crises and family crises on top of it. And life finally like slammed me up against the wall and said, what are you made of? Are you going to fold, or are you going to figure this out? And then once I committed to being like fully alive and fully awake and becoming who I could become, and started studying it, I got more done in probably 9 months than I did in 9 years, simply because I was leveraging Mother Nature. And that included appealing to the needs of my team, right? Like building a culture as opposed to being a dictator. That's what I was taught on the farm also. Like, speak when spoken to, I sign your paycheck, therefore my word is your command, right? And so that doesn't work very well in dental settings, I found out. And so I started studying high performance, which I think often gets misconstrued with achievement. Achievement we're all really good at, but usually there's a lot of collateral damage. Once I realized that there was an option to stop this or game, and we could actually have an and game where I had a work and life, and I had profit and purpose. And I wasn't denying myself these things because it was the right thing to do, because sacrifice wins all the time, right? And so I had to get off the delayed life plan, and I had to get off the that kind of hedonistic adaptation where I'd get one more thing and it'd feel good for a day and a half, and then it would feel like the same old crappy me. And realize that you can have the achievement with a reduction in stress and an increase in fulfillment if you play your cards right. And so you have to see where that's happening, and it's hard to find. But I realized that the pillars are clarity, energy, courage, productivity, and influence. And once I started pushing on those, and just an understanding that was driven by habits, and just getting a little bit of an increase in the trend line, knowing that if I can just extend that, then eventually I get to where I want to go, and not doing this like rocket ship exponential growth thing that I always try to do, and then I would fall flat on my face in fatigue or frustration. That unlocked everything for me. And then you extend that into like a dental practice, like you can unlock that in your team they understand that. I mean, people want to be aligned, they just don't know that that's a possibility because they've only worked in dysfunctional businesses. They don't realize that work doesn't have to be miserable, that it can be more than just a paycheck. So you just start seeing these doors of opportunity because now you're leveraging the right things as opposed to the wrong things. But probably the most important in all of that I see in dentistry is the courage piece. Like I was told when I went to dental school, and it was pretty good advice actually, was to like remain anonymous. And I remember having a moral victory when I went to my TMJ instructor with a question, and he said, "Are you in my class?" So out of 54 people, I blended in somehow. But saying like, your practice, your version of success does not have to look like mine, and mine nor like yours. And so going on that and saying like, and that's why we wrote Titans of Dentistry, quite frankly, is like, success is defined by the end user, not by the guy on the stage, not by the persons whose name's on the front of the book. Like, write your own book. And dentists have a really hard time with that. It feels like some narcissistic play for some of them, which is a far cry from the servant golden hearted mentality that a lot of them have. But once you know what you want and why you want it, know that the next question isn't how, it's who do I have to become to get it. Then we get at this B level that we ignore in the rat race of the doing and the having, and you can level up your identity there, but you can't until you know what you want. So there's a lot of psychology in there that I had no idea, and I'm still in that rabbit hole of understanding at a deeper and deeper levels of what drives people to be great and what keeps them stuck. But I think going down to the habit level again is where it all has to start. Otherwise, we're deceiving ourselves into thinking we're creating real change. And that's, I mean, the New Year's resolution is the perfect example of that. That's just like a fail from, it's a joke, right? And it's because we don't have the right blueprint for behavior change and what it is and what it isn't. And we think willpower and enough grit and hustle will be the attractive ingredient. Sometimes life needs that, but usually that's the short-term play. The long-term play is figuring out your own psychology, your own limiting beliefs, what you want, and saying like, it's okay if my mom doesn't agree. It's okay if my favorite classmate doesn't agree. It's okay if the dentist down the street doesn't agree. Like, I've got one chance at this dance, and I'm going to kind of play the game in a way that favors me and my family and the people who you really care about, right? Who you really want to serve. So I get really passionate when I think about it, because it was such a breakthrough in like 3-4 years for me that I forget the thrust that came from that once I finally unlocked the secrets that aren't secrets at all. They're just kind of hidden away. You know, a lot of the self-help and leadership, the works are fluff. There's just theory. But once you get to the science of it, like, it's pretty easy to leverage.
Yeah. I like when you said once you unlocked it, because I want to write this article called The Tipping Point of Transformation, where the beginning of transformation, it takes a lot of effort because you don't see the other side of it. But then as soon as you find a few self-limiting beliefs, and then you're able to turn them, and then you see how much you've unlocked. Like, you know, I mean, I love what you said at the beginning, that if you weren't successful, it meant that you weren't working hard enough. Then, you know, all of a sudden you realize, oh, that's just a belief, you know, and there's probably other beliefs in there too, like, oh, I can only ever make this amount of money, and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, I could actually work half as much and make more money if I believed that were possible. Then now my subconscious is open to finding ways to embody that. There's this huge rush of energy there, and so much liberation that you just never thought was possible. And I think that's why, you know, you said they kind of seem like secrets, because it's so far below, it's so much more than you think it is when you start. You're just like, okay, yeah, maybe I'm going to deal with some of my past and whatever. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh no, I get to completely transform my life and live by a whole different set of rules. Right. Which is
I was in a course in I'm not a movie person just because I can't sit for that long, but one of the assignments was to watch The Matrix. And so my son and I watched the 3 Matrix, and it's kind of like that. Like, I was this lemming, and I was marching to the beat of someone else's drum, and then all of a sudden I realized that I really didn't have to do that, and there wasn't much stopping me from marching to the beat of my own drum, and that it wasn't a selfish play at all. It ended up that I was better to my patients, I was way better to my team, better to my family. I took more vacations than ever. Had the time off to be on the ski mountain, which is why I moved here in the first place. Like, it was I don't want to oversimplify it, because I think that's part of the problem. Is it's unbelievable because people think they can just sit on the cushion and then all of a sudden all this stuff falls in their lap. It's not like that at all. It's work. But once you shift the possibility and the behavior follows that pattern, then you realize that, you know, there's a lot of wasted time and motion and energy and thought, and just breaking those. You use the word term liberation, and it's exactly like that. Like the chains break and you didn't even really realize they were there. They were just the normal. And it really becomes a new life. For me, it was all in about 6 or 7 months time. And like when I speak of it from stage, sometimes people will question my timeline because it seems unreal, and to me it seems unreal too. But I had I had so much. I was just running and running and running and running, and once somebody said, "Okay, I put you down," I took off at such a velocity just because that was the missing piece. Is I had no traction, and that gave me all the traction I needed. And then you back that up with some work ethic and some discipline, and it's like it's a really quick pivot. And I hope listeners understand that, like, that's available, and you may need some insight. You may need to unplug from some authorities, some gurus that are telling you that this is the way it's done and this is the way your hygiene recare system should work or whatever. There's all these rules that once I started breaking them, then the results were quite fantastic. But it started with me being selfish to become more of a better servant and stop getting off that chase of significance, which was supported by income. Once I disconnected from that, the income followed too. So it was just I think the elements in the equation were in the wrong order for me.
Yeah, that's why it's not, I think if you haven't done this work of sort of the awakening, or, I mean, you said like it felt like you were kind of a lemming before and you had no idea. I mean, same with me. If anyone would have told me at that time, oh, you're kind of asleep, I mean, I would have probably gotten really pissed off.
Yeah,
Like,
for
you
sure.
don't know what, like, no, I'm not. But I definitely was in a lot of respects. And I like what you said about the process well, before I say that, it's not a quick fix, and that you can't just change a couple habits and expect that you're going to sort of be liberated from thought constructs that have had a hold on you for your whole life. So and I think everyone's timeline is different, and that's why I say like tipping point, because maybe you reach a tipping point really quickly, but then you just kind of continue, right? And you continue unearthing self-limiting beliefs and transforming them and liberating yourself more and more and more. And that's why the journey is so exciting. And that's why I think once you've done a certain amount of work, it's not hard to continue to do the work. It's a rapidly accelerating process. The other thing I liked that you mentioned was that you might have to disconnect from some sort of authorities in your life. And I think this is a really good time to think about your own sort of self-sovereignty and being able to create boundaries that are healthy for you. And I talk to so many people, and a lot of the decisions they're making as people in their 30s, 40s, 50s is what their parents want them to do, like still. Yeah. And they'll say, well, my parents are expecting this of me and I don't want to disappoint them. And it's kind of like at the end of the day, whoa, like, what do you want? Just like you said, like asking that question of what do you really want, and giving yourself permission to really explore what you really want. And on top of that, this was a really hard lesson for me, was to trust that at the end of the day, I had all of the inner authority that I needed, right? Like I don't actually need someone to tell me who to be or how to live. And growing up,
You need more initials behind your last name.
Yeah. Growing up, like really inundated in a church, in church that was very much like, we need to tell you, and then just, kind of a smaller town, and having this mentality of, it doesn't matter what you want. What matters is that you do what you're told and that you are a certain way. I really kept looking for one authority after another, and to tell me who to be, and also to see me. But the thing is that I I needed to see myself at the end of the day. And I needed to be able to establish an inner sense of authority. And an easy way to do that for people listening is whenever anyone tells you any information, I mean, including what Dave and I have been talking about, just ask like yourself, does this resonate? Like, does this resonate for me? Does this feel right for me? And not the defensive sort of, I don't want to hear this because it's triggering me. But like, if I'm calm and centered and sitting here, is there an element of truth to this that feels right to me? And cross-reference that intuition with what everybody tells you, because I don't know about for you, but for me personally, when I finally started just trusting my inner voice and my inner sense of authority, that was maybe one of the most liberating moments for me.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And what, when people see you act courageously, what does that do? Like we're afraid of, we're afraid of the scowls and frowns and thumbs down from courageous behavior. But you see people, like I remember your presentation at Mark Costa's event a couple years ago. Like it was not your typical dental presentation, right?
Yeah.
But like what I saw in the crowd was like this, oh my gosh, like they knew this was a big courageous play for you, and it unlocks that like next level for them to say like, if I just lean into this discomfort a little bit, what what is available? You know, I think it's role modeling, certainly, when I think of from like a leadership or parenting term. But we're so scared of like what other people will think, and some, it may be true. You might, not all people may support you, but what you see in the the eyes and the behaviors of people who embrace the courage is the liberation within them, even if in just in thought, right? Hopefully it leads to action. Hopefully, you know, it's a ripple effect. But even if it's just a seed that gets discovered later on, it's enough. And so that was hard for me because um, I always backed down. You know, I didn't ever want to ruffle any feathers. I I was a wallflower, certainly through dental school, undergrad, high school, and so to say, like, who cares? It was really hard, but
Yeah.
less people care than I thought, and the people who did care usually were like, "Wow, I didn't ever think you would speak from stage," and I was like, "I didn't either," or "I didn't think you'd start
Right.
a podcast," and I was like, "It was kind of like an entrepreneurial seizure. I just did it." But what that unlocks in you and the people around you is a huge um, potential. So dentists who don't like to stick out traditionally, who aren't attention seeking, I think that's, I mean, you've certainly been a great role model for that. It's like, just try it. It's scary and it's maybe not comfortable, but sometimes the rewards are unexpected, not only for you, but the people who get to observe that.
Yeah. I think that courage and authenticity are the two things that we as humans resonate with when other people are showing us those traits. And it just can spark such an energy within us to go out and do the same. And interestingly, you know, to be authentic, you have to be really vulnerable. And I think vulnerability and being our authentic selves in a courageous way is probably the most terrifying thing, but it's also the most rewarding thing. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, you brought up Mark's event. Like, I actually, just a couple episodes ago, I was talking about it because that for me at the time was the scariest thing I'd ever done. Like, for some reason, well, I mean, I know why. I had a lot of shame around that event. And for
Mm-hmm.
those that haven't listened to previous episodes, when I was in high school, I was in a drinking and driving accident where the driver was drunk and my best friend was killed in the car accident. And I had not really told maybe more than 5 people that story from after high school. I mean, of course, everyone in high school knew. But I realized I was holding it so close to me because I had a lot of shame around it. I was 14 drinking, and I remember after the accident, like the whole town was talking about, oh, that, you know, she's so young, 14 drinking. And it was like there was more gossip about me being 14 and drinking than about the fact that my best friend had just died. And it's so interesting how our subconscious and our psyche works, because I had internalized that event, you know, with the grief sort of like interwoven with the shame. And so I then started carrying around shame associated with grief, right? Like anytime I would feel grief about anything, I would somehow feel shame for it. And it's just like these patterns that get set up from earlier events. But finally, I just was like, I need to do something big to liberate myself from this. And Brene Brown talks about how, you know, shame can't survive once it's spoken aloud. And so in a way, that's kind of what I was doing with that event. Is I was like, okay, I've only told 5-10 people this story, but I'm going to go tell 500 dentists this story. And even though I'd done a lot of speaking before that event, I was dry heaving in the bathroom. I was so terrified. And then I was telling someone I just interviewed the other day that the crazy awesome thing about what happened after is for about 4 months, I was completely impervious to fear. I just was like,
so awesome,
so fearless. And I never felt that way in my life. And actually within the next 4 months, I thought that event was going to be kind of like this bow tie on a crazy year and everything was going to settle down after that. But it was actually an opening, because it was as if I opened the door for my true self to walk through it. And actually within, I think 2 months of that event, I left my practice. I got a divorce. I mean, it was like everything changed because I all of a sudden had all this crazy courage to do it, and all the fear was completely removed. And it's like, what would our lives be like if we were always fearless? I mean, so much shifted for me from taking that leap. And that's also why I think that the bigger the leap, usually the bigger the payoff.
Mm-hmm.
But life really rewards us when we get an intuitive sense that we should do something. And let me tell you, everyone said I was crazy for saying I was going to speak at that event. I actually was seeing a therapist and I was telling her, oh, I think I'm going to tell this story. And she told me not to. And I, and I actually ended up leaving that therapist because I was like, that doesn't feel right. And that, again, to me was like my inner authority. Like I was saying, like, this doesn't feel right that this therapist is telling me not to do this thing. And I found a therapist that super supported me in doing it. So, yeah. What about your experiences with courage? What have the payoffs felt and looked like for you?
Oh man, so I started my podcast in 2013, and the only other one was Gary Tactics at the time.
Oh wow, I
And
didn't realize you started that early.
yeah, and I joke that I was voted least likely to start a podcast in my dental school class, but there was no podcast back then. But you get the idea. Like I recorded 3 on the first day, and at the time, like when I pitched it, I had to explain what it was. Right? It was like so
Esoteric for that
cutting
time.
edge, I guess I
Yeah.
would say. And so that was a synergy of 2 things. And you had mentioned Tim Ferriss, who has been like mega influence on me. He's the reason I live here, because he was talking about the delayed life plan. Like, I don't want to live for retirement or vacation. I just want to have it in my freaking backyard. Right. And in my dental town signature was a quote by Tim Ferriss that said, the thing that you most fear doing is usually the thing that you most need to do, essentially. So I discovered podcasts, and I had reached out to John Lee Dumas, who was the host of Entrepreneur on Fire, which was an early podcast, was the first daily podcast. And he became my mentor. And I leaned into it, bought some equipment, and then I backed out. And then I kept reading that quote, and I was like, I'm a hypocrite if I don't do this. And so I just had to do it. And so I launched it, and that one move, for no apparent reason, really. Like I knew it was going to be a thing. I knew podcasting was going to be a thing. I guess that was the only insight that I had, has unlocked more genuine friendships for me. And then to level that up, that led to speaking, and I started getting like really raw when I would speak. Like, still some of those stories I tell, like, bring me to tears, even though I've told them dozens and dozens of times. And those 10 years before would be like what you said, like my deepest, darkest secrets. And I didn't appreciate, if I was doing as an act of service, because I knew that if I shared my stories, then people, because I suffered in silence for so long when I was struggling in my practice, that would pull people say like, okay, I'm not alone, and that I don't have to be in isolation. So that's helped me help people. But probably the number one thing is the feeling that you explained is like, who cares?
Yeah.
Like somebody once told me, and I'm not, I use the word power a lot when I coach and train, because I think we're seeking that, but we've seen the misuses of power, so we don't want to say it. I think it was at Mark's last event, 700 people. I said, who here wants more power? And like 4 people raised their hand.
You're kidding.
No. But
Wow.
they're there because that's what they want, right? And so my whole thing
but
was
I mean, when you say power, do you mean like to be empowered as a human, or do you mean use the misuse of power?
I mean, like a genuine servants, like, I mean, the people that we most respect. But my
But
point
everybody
was
else is
we see
yeah.
we see the government and big businesses misuse of power. Therefore, we shrink away from it.
Yes.
But if we actually use it as a force of nature to expand our practice or whatever, like this is what we're all seeking, but we're in denial of this thing that we're seeking. But somebody told me that the most powerful person in the room is the person that has nothing to hide. And so like I just like tell everything, like the things I'm most ashamed of, the things I'm most embarrassed about, the things that are most painful, like that piece alone, I think, is what you're expressing, is like, it's, you don't realize the weight of that until it's gone. And there's an unlimited purging of that. There's always something else where you're not, I mean, it's not like just deal with me type thing. You're just like telling your story or opinion. And I'm still really not risk averse, but conflict averse. So I don't want to offend anyone, but I speak it as my opinion and my truth. And usually it's well received, but the payoffs from those 3 levels, the relationships, the courage, and the ability to influence and impact people on a one-on-one basis. Like I never, ever, ever could have seen that coming. I saw myself as being a dentist for, a normal 60 till 65, just like everyone else. And now it's opened so many doors of opportunity that I never would have seen. And it still happens. It still happens. Like the feedback and the text from podcasts, like sometimes I'm like, I don't remember saying that, but I'm glad it was, I'm glad it was.
You're like, wow, that was a smart guy
right
who said
time.
that.
So endless, like every time I mean, it's a Brene Brown quote, like step forward into courage or back into comfort. Now I look at it, every single decision is really that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's like a constant expansion process.
Wow. Yeah. And Joseph Campbell, I love one of his quotes. If you take 1 step towards the gods will take 10 steps towards you.
Yeah.
And that's so awesome, that little idea about starting a podcast, even though at the time it didn't feel little because you were so nervous about it.
Yeah.
But in the context of everything else that you've done since then, it was kind of like a little decision, right? And it was one of those things where, because of the timing, everybody would have maybe was or would have been like, why are you doing this? What are you doing? We don't even know what this is. But your intuition was really, at the end of the day, what you were going off of. So I talk to people about intuition all the time, because I feel like it comes differently for different people. But how can you, like, what was it within you? Was it just like an internalized kind of pressure, or how does intuition present to you when you know that you should do something, even if you can't find the logical reason for doing it?
And like, that's a big question for me, because I have a big story in intuition. Do you want to hear it?
Yeah.
So I was always a why person, and if it didn't make sense to me, then I was a little bit of like a closet rebel, I guess I would say. And so I went to a church that was very ceremonious. It's a Christian Orthodox church, very similar to Catholicism, but maybe more rules. And it's part of my heritage. My grandparents were Lebanese immigrants, and my whole family went there. And as soon as I could drive and put enough resistance, I stopped going completely. And it made my mom really upset for a number of years. And so I probably attended 4 times all through high school and all through undergrad. And then I went home for Christmas right after I got my college degree. And she said, "Will you please go to confession?" And I said, "No, Mom, I'm not going to confession." And she kept begging me and begging me and begging me. And all of a sudden I conceded just for her. I mean, like, if it gives her some peace of mind, then I'll do it. So I go to the altar, and the priest was the priest that I grew up with. I was actually an altar boy at a really young age. And so I knew him really well, and he knew me really well, but he hadn't seen me in a while, obviously. And so, like, I knew the gig. Like, I knew what he was going to say. I knew what he was going to ask me. I was going to go through the motions. And he leaned over. I was kneeling down. I forget what that's called. And he said, not what I expected him to say. He said, "David, I understand that you just graduated from college." And I said, "Yes, Father." And he said, "I want you to know that and 50 cents will get you a cup of coffee." I go, "I understand." And he goes, "It's what you do with that really matters." And I go, "Yeah, I appreciate that." He goes, "But there's a voice inside of you." He goes, "You can call it intuition. You can call it conscious. You can call it the Holy Spirit." Because I don't really care. But listen to that, because it'll lead you right down the right paths. And I was so shocked that he went there, because it was everything. It was the opposite of everything I knew from being in the altar and doing the same things over and over with a little different gospel reading or whatever. And it was a shock treatment, and it was the right words at the right time. I was applying to dental school. And ever since then, like, I just knew that I could lean on that, like, even if it didn't make sense. And that's the reason I joined the Army. That's the reason like, every big decision now, I lean on that. And the more you study business, the more you realize, like, some really big founders and innovators, like, do that. I think it's the founder of Sony, and I can't remember if that's a Japanese country, but they asked him, like, you did all these acquisitions and you created this giant business empire. What's your secret? He said, "Well, I'd look at the P&Ls and all the financial statements and do all the research. And then after I was done with the research," he said, in his native tongue, "I would swallow the deal." And if the evidence was yes, and his intuition said no, he wouldn't do it. And if the information said no and his intuition said yes, he would do it. So ultimately, it was just this intuition play that, I mean, he didn't want to go in naive. Clearly, that wouldn't be smart business. But he gathered the evidence, and then there was one less to check, and that was the final. That was the jury's. I mean, that was ultimately the action step. And so it's not something I commonly talk about, because people aren't always receptive to that conversation, particularly being academics. But as Father Phil told me, it will never do you wrong. I can say with 100% confidence, it's always been the right answer. And sometimes it didn't seem like it. Like, moving here in 2009 and doing a scratch start practice, for many times seemed like the worst decision I could have made. Like 4 years in, 5 years in, it was like, I'm such a stupid business person. But once I had that breakthrough, then all the dots connected. Like, it made perfect sense. Like, that was the right decision. I didn't have all the information the whole time. Right. So that is a big player for me. I almost feel like between that and meditation, like, I have an unfair advantage. And so I'm glad you asked that question, because I don't often get to talk about it, but it's a big, like, it's the ultimate deciding factor for me.
Yeah. And I like that you gave that example of the guy at Sony, because, I know I work with a lot of entrepreneurs just coaching, and I know a lot of, just from the reading I've done, a lot of venture capitalists and people that hear pitches, at the end of the day, they're going with their intuition as well.
Yeah.
And some of the biggest CEOs are working with people right now just to develop their intuition. I mean, as much as it used to be sort of like woo-woo to talk about intuition, it's now really being leveraged along with meditation, as you said, because meditation allows you to tap into your intuition easier because it quiets all the noise. But one thing I tell people that I work with is, if you're struggling with a decision and your intuition is telling you one thing, but then your logical mind is telling you something else, if you just look at your track record for intuition. Like, as much as it's sometimes the decision doesn't make sense, like you just said, it's never been wrong when you follow that. And sometimes you have to trust your own track record and say, like, yeah, okay, my logical brain is saying this, but my intuition is telling me this. And a lot of the like lethargy that people will get, or exhaustion, or inner stress and tension, is simply them resisting their intuition. And it's interesting because when you just follow it, a lot of times that resistance or tension will just break in a moment when you're like, fine, okay, I'm just going to go with my intuition, even though I'm scared shitless. I'm just going to do this. And then all of a sudden it's just like all this energy is freed up.
For you, as does it get stronger with use, do you feel like?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. So like, I feel now that it would have been like 97 where I had that event that really kind of changed the course for me. And now, like, it's so like, I feel like I have such a sensitivity that sometimes I don't trust it, because it's like, there's like with people in particular, like sometimes I'm like, everyone's like, oh, he was awesome or she was awesome. And I'm like, I don't care to pursue any level of connection or business venture with this person. And I don't even know why. And sometimes I find out why later down the road, but like, I can literally now have zero logical evidence, and still it's worth trusting for me, just because it's developed for me.
Yeah, same for me. I mean, it really is like a muscle, like the more you use it. The interesting thing is, when you purposely go against that voice, it gets quieter. So I hear a lot of people, I mean, I think the two things that really quiet the voice of intuition is being in survival mode. So like, if you're in a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, it's really hard to hear your intuition because the anxiety is so loud. And the second thing is, when you purposely for years will ignore it, then it takes a little bit of time sometimes to connect again with that inner voice. But then even when you just do it in small ways, you'll start hearing it more and more. And now, just like you, I will literally, my entire day at this point is based on intuition. Wow. Like, I will wake up and be like, okay, what should I do right now? I mean, down to some of the most minute details, which you would think are ridiculous. Like, why does it matter when you have your coffee? But I'll just go with intuition. And it's really what you were saying earlier in terms of leveraging nature and moving with nature, my own personal rhythms in nature, versus going against it, which for me has led to, oh man, just an easier life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's like, when you're introspective, are you documenting insights that you're gathering?
Oh God.
Journaler?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I have, especially when I've been really in the thick of it, I'll sometimes go through 2 journals a month. But I also at a time realized that I was probably going to use all the information that I had to create workshops and help other people and coach other people. And so I've also started collecting data from that perspective. But for me, yeah, writing it out has been really helpful.
Yeah. I resisted journaling for a long time. Like, of the great habits, that's the one that I pushed off for the longest time. And now, like, for me, if I do a meditation session, even for just a few minutes, just to kind of clear my head, and then I grab a pen, like, what comes from that pen, like, I don't know where some of that stuff is coming from. Like, it's deep. It's in the crevices of the cave, I feel like. And those may later, when I look at my typical behavior or my historic behavior, those might pop up as insights, but it's a flicker. But there's something about a pen and paper, a pencil and paper. And I mean, I heard all the people saying, like, don't do it digitally, all this sort of stuff. And like, I don't know why I pushed it off for so long, but that has been a breakthrough for me in the last couple of years. to go from one, not journaling, to journaling with prompts, questions. So some of those like high performance journal and best self journal, to just like free writing, blank page. Like it's, I always looking for ways to level up or feel better. And that has been a significant impact on just unpacking things or fresh ideas for business or whatever it is. That I shared with you that I was just about to have a 9-foot whiteboard delivered so that I could journal standing up. They couldn't get it on the elevator, but now I've become kind of maniacal about just documenting. And sometimes the thought doesn't come until the pen is in hand. So it's not like idea then right. Sometimes it's I'm here to do something, I'm not quite sure what, and then there's a flow state that follows there for me, that has really been impactful for me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The thing that really got me back into journaling was morning pages. So Julia Cameron's book, The Artist Way, I actually heard on one of Tim Ferriss's podcasts, the producer for the show Billions. He said he did The Artist Way, and this was like the 10th time I had heard The Artist Way mentioned on multiple podcasts. So I picked up the book, and it's a really nice sort of 12-week journey. And the one thing she has you do every morning is called morning pages, where you just freeform write for 3 pages, which can take anywhere from like 5 to 15 minutes. And it's really to get the monkey mind out. And the most amazing thing when I first started doing that exercise was I would just write whatever was coming into my head. And I was like, wow, there's a real asshole in my head. Like, that says some really fucked up shit. That's like not being very nice and saying mean things about me. And the more I started just getting that out on the page, first of all, the calmer I was those days. And second of all, I started then being able to notice my thoughts in real time of, oh, there's that voice again. But the really cool thing that started happening was maybe a weekend where I would get maybe like a page and a half out of just whatever was floating around in my head. And then all of a sudden, just like you're saying, it's like something took over my hand and I started writing all kind of some like profound thoughts and maybe some things that I should try doing. And it was like I was just letting, because the whole thing about morning pages is you're not supposed to self-edit. You're just supposed to go without thinking. So it really removes the overthinking conscious mind, and it allows an opportunity for the subconscious to start coming through. And so I started really having these breakthroughs in my morning pages where it was like this kinder, gentler voice that was full of self-love and compassion and really a lot of wisdom would then all of a sudden emerge. And he really started giving me a footing. And so for anybody, and I think men in particular probably have a harder time journaling, and it feels self-indulgent to a point, right? Like, it's like, why am I doing this? And that was really why I stopped journaling for many years, is I was like, this feels too self-indulgent and I don't understand, and I don't want to just bitch on the page, and I don't know what the point of it is. And maybe even it's hurting me because I'm just writing about all my complaints or whatever. But then when I started doing morning pages, I really had this breakthrough of, my life really started shifting at that point. And so I think prompts are such a good way. I mean, in the online workshops that I'm building, I have a lot of journaling prompts in there. Prompts are a good way to start doing it. But it's not like as you can attest to, it's not like a Dear Diary thing that we're doing here. It's way more, and the most successful people in the world, like, they all have some sort of journaling process.
Yeah. It was actually a leadership training, but this is very applicable to this conversation. They were talking about team meetings, one-on-one meetings, those sorts of things, how important it is to office culture. And the guy said something that I feel like I kind of knew academically, but it just hit me at the right time. He said, there's no such thing as suppressed feelings. And then he went into say, I used to use a hygienist. Let's pick on hygienist for a little bit. Like, no big deal, la-di-da, hakuna matata, like business as usual. And all of a sudden, like, there's this blow up out of left field. Well, it ain't that thing. It's all the other things that you thought she didn't care about, she did care about, right? And we do that too, right? Like, I really appreciate that you talked about the dark side. Like nobody wants to talk about it, but it's always there in all of us. And so it's really like, I mean, I think about it like if I took in some toxic food, like I would want to purge it out, right? Same thing with I mean, there's beautiful insights and thoughts that we talk about, but there's also stuff that's like ugly and nasty, and you know, it's some of it's the relationship that we have with ourselves, that where there's an inner dialogue or critic that we have to figure out. But just dancing with that is a real powerful process. And I mean, historically, when I work with dentists, they want the procedure with the instruments and the you know, materials, and it's not really like that. Like it's a completely different skill set. So I can see why you say like the prompts are what get us started, but ultimately we can evolve into something that's much more advanced and much more beneficial. But yeah, it's sometimes, you know, like those old movies where there'd be a lock on the diary or whatever. I feel like I should lock mine up, because if somebody saw what I put down.
Oh man, I have thought the same. I thought like, what if, you know, or I've taken my notebook onto like a plane and I'm like, oh God, what if I left this on the plane? And somebody opened it up and they're like, who is this fucking crazy person?
Put her in
That, yeah.
oh.
That like some pages look normal, but then other pages there's like this big writing and this and yeah, I mean, but it's good to get that out. I like that you said like they're not, yeah, you can't suppress those things. I mean, we think that we're suppressing our feelings and emotions and thoughts, and they're
That
coming
was my
out.
whole childhood. I would get by with something thinking, oh, my dad didn't care, and then the next time he didn't care, and then like hell would come, and all of a sudden, like every single one of those incidents was documented in the yelling match that happened. And so yeah, I think that's who we are, and to ignore that is not useful, and to really leverage that and figure out there's power in there, and there's also things that are suppressing our power. And if
Yeah.
we don't do something with that, I mean, you know, I think therapists are great. I'm relying on one now. That's kind of taboo, but this is a way to kind of have a on-demand self process there, where we're purging and gaining insights, whatever is needed or whatever is required at the moment.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just talking to my therapist, and I've had a therapist off and on for, I mean, since I was 14. And I was just talking to her the other day, and her and I have done so much sort of excavating of the past and transforming. And we were talking about where we should go from here. And I was saying that, you know, even though there's maybe not something, I guess, specific that I am needing to work through at this time,
Mm-hmm.
I so value that mirror, and that
Mm-hmm.
having someone just witness the journey and reflect things back to you and things that you're maybe not seeing. And I always think, and that's why I like super value coaches and advisors and therapists, and just having an unbiased observer, you know, as opposed to our partner or family members or friends who are like they're not unbiased. And at the end of the day, it's nice to just have somebody to reflect back to you what it is that you're thinking and feeling, because sometimes like when we're in it, it's hard to see the bigger picture, right?
No, I mean, like that. I mean, now that I'm a coach, I can see it from both angles, right? Like the person who's struggling, I mean, sometimes it's literally like they're drowning in a foot and a half of water, and you're like, you just have to stand up. It's
Yeah.
like, but when you're there, you don't see it. So it's that emotional distance that allows you to see their blind spot. That's like can be so ugly and so vicious, and literally, it's like the door is just to your left, right? And
Right.
they completely are oblivious to the opportunity that stands right in front of them.
Um, Man, I feel like I could just talk to you all day. I have two questions I want to end with.
Okay.
One being touching on what we were just talking about. How, if someone is like, well, you know, how would I, if someone has never had a coach, an advisor, or therapist, and they're like, well, how do I know when I need one?
Mm.
What would you say?
Well, the roadblock I found myself running up against is that sometimes you lean on people when you're kind of like in an unfixable state, it's like, it's too late. You know what I mean? So like, um, I always have one or two or three.
Same. Yeah.
And I think the barrier typically for dentists is that we have to understand that it's not an expense, it's an investment. Um, Certainly for me, usually there's a direct ROI. But if it helps me sleep a little bit better, I mean, there's a ripple effect there. I'm kinder, I'm more compassionate, I am a better dad. So I would say always and forever. I mean, like I can tell you, I use Talkspace, and I don't make time for it unless I'm like, I kind of need Corey today, right? And that's the wrong way to go about it. I think the more we make these things, demystify these things, and the more we realize the real power of them, like it doesn't mean you're dysfunctional,
Yeah.
because you're relying on us because you want to be better and you don't want to be stuck, or you don't want to feel chronic pain of emotional state or otherwise. So, I mean, I guess my short answer is always and forever. Like, find people. I feel like I graduate beyond some people. Like, I'll find some person, I'm like, this is exactly what I need right now. And then 14 months later, I kind of like, yeah, I get it. And I'm ready for the next trusted advisor of sorts. So I don't know if that's the person, the quick start of me that always gets bored, but I think if you're leveraging the resource appropriately, it's important to get another angle on it. And there's always, I mean, we keep talking about this like it's literally an onion that she should never, I mean, there's another layer, and there's another layer, and there's another layer. And that can be really daunting. But if you fall in love with the process, then that's the journey, that's the joy, right? And so I the more I utilize them, the more I believe in them, and the more I like them over, like, saying, going to a weekend conference, because that's just like this blast, and then it doesn't really change anything about what I'm doing. Most of the coursework and coaching work and therapy work I do, there's a continuum there, and now I know enough about behavior change that that's almost required. Like, we joke about, we went to the SIA course and nothing changed on Monday. You're like, yeah, that's how it works. That's why when you commit to something for a year, things really change. And in coaching, at least my training, they say that a typical transformation can take 2 years. So if you want those big results, you need to find one, good guidance. I feel like people who are really in your corner, and people who are aligned with you, unpacking your truth. Like, that's the most frustrating thing that I like. I won't talk too much about it because I get really angry, but the cutter approach to dental consulting, from the business standpoint, like, oh, you're maxed out, so you need an associate or partner now. Like, no, that's not a need. That's more is better. Money equals results. So I'm passionate about it. I've never not gotten a return, and some of the people I've invested in are very, very expensive, but I never. Part of that's just my commitment. Like, if I'm going to give you 5,000, I know that I'm going to get a return out of just out of commitment, right? So, awesome question, and I think there's far too few of our colleagues that are reliant upon that, and think that it's just that rugged individualist that you referred to earlier, that I can figure it out. It's just that in the book, or I just need to read the book, or more grit and hustle to get the breakthrough. And a lot of times it's that person seeing something in you or in your subconscious, or a theme that keeps coming up in your language patterns that points it out, and you're like, okay, well, that was easy, but it took me 30 years to get to that point. To me, that's what a good coach or therapist in your corner can do for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I'll tell people, it's not that you can't figure some things out on your own. It's that do you want to accelerate the process? And like you just said, talk to people who have gone through it. And not only that, but I truly have never met a person that is really evolved that has never had outside counsel. You know what I mean? Like in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form. There's obviously some people that more of the journey is on their own. And then there's some people that, man, they'll just go through everything, like all the Tony Robbins courses and have a bunch of coaches and therapists. And, it can vary from person to person. There's no right or wrong.
Right.
But I think that even just connecting with someone that can help you understand like what the path is so that you don't have to be so afraid of starting on the journey.
Yeah. No, for sure.
So the last question I have for you is, being a coach, you give a lot of your energy away. And of course there's like an energetic exchange with that, you're paid. But I think one of the most important things that we can give ourselves, especially during this time, is just kind of self-love and self-care and self-nurturing and that kind of thing. What ways do you do that for yourself?
I always start the day with sweat. I feel like if I don't have a proactive play in my day, then I can really fall into reactive, whether it be social media or emails or stuff at home. And so I want the first move to be proactive. And so for me, it's usually a Peloton. Um, I'm a big, I've used the weather or can't make it to the gym today as an excuse for so long that I had to build a whole home gym. I think now in this COVID kind of fear culture, I think if somebody doesn't have a meditation practice, now is a good time to research it. So I'll go from exercise to meditation to journaling. That's the perfect habit stack for me. Some people, I've tried it the other way around and it doesn't work quite as well. But again, this is a customizable process. But to me, like a good night's sleep, getting up with exercise, and a meditation and journaling. Sometimes they're short, sometimes they're messy, sometimes you have gold medal ones and silver medal ones, and did not rank days that you do it. But that having that locked and loaded gives me, I feel like if nothing else good happens in the day, that's already out of the way. So that's super important to me. And then I guess the next piece would be going full circle in the conversation. Like sometimes it's just a text reach out, like, hey, and now more than ever, like I reconnected with old college roommates, and it's easy. We have the time, and it's the perfect reason to say, hey man, like, how you holding up, right? To me, sometimes that creates a really beautiful dialogue of catch up and vulnerability and authenticity, because sometimes it isn't great, depending on what their occupation is and their life circumstance. So to me, that if those 3 or 4 things are accomplished, if nothing else goes right during the day, it still is a pretty good day.
Yeah, that's awesome. How can people connect with your work and connect with you personally?
I am delivering as much free content as I can right now. I kind of have a ongoing short podcast called the Courageous Leader Challenge, because I feel like now is the time. And leadership can mean a lot of things. You don't have to become Martin Luther King Jr. or Gandhi, but we're in a position where those points can really be utilized, and even for your own advantage. Like it's the call to adventure, where we say like, okay, is this my time to rise and become more? And so I have the Relentless Dentist podcast. Some of that's video content on Instagram at Relentless Dentist, but I just like the human contact. So a DM or an email always makes my day. So if somebody wants to reach out to me personally and just chat, I'm doing a ton of pro bono work right now, just because I want to help however I can. And I'm telling people to preserve cash. So, charging extra and more doesn't seem right now. So dr.dave@relentlessdentist.com is the easiest way to get directly in touch with me.
Okay, awesome. And we'll have all those links available for everybody. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think this is going to be...
It was a fun conversation. It was great to connect with you and get to know you better. And I appreciate what you stand for. I think the message that you have is really what probably we've always needed to hear, but now more than ever, like we have this golden opportunity, and to not discover what we want or who we are at a deeper level, even if it's one layer deeper, I think we're missing that time in our in our personal history, if there ever was one.
100%. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
Great to see you.
Bye-bye.